Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this whole video we're off to Kentucky. Might even say off to the races. Should have said Derby. In this whole one we're talking about champions. Champions in the competition of who can be the worst possible. This one's a good one. I mean, not good at all, but you know what I mean. Because after Ryan Champion hired a guy to do a job, he said, you know what, fine. I'll do it myself. But he sure as hell didn't want it to look that way. Let's take it from there so I can stop talking around it and give it a go. In the far southwestern chunk of Kentucky Fried Chicken lies a county, shockingly. It's named after a fella named Stephen Trigg. Are you familiar? No. He fought in the Revolutionary War, so you should have probably called him Trigger, and he was shot dead by the Brits in 1782. They also quartered his body. Ugh, yuck. But I'm sure he's chuffed because he got a county named after him in Kentucky. Trigg County, so clearly worth it. And so Trigg County, biggest town Cadiz, or Cadiz, Cadiz nuts, is where we are today. About 15,000 people live there. It was a dry county, no alcohol until 2009. It's amazing there was no alcohol there. Because there really is nothing to do, which is kind of where our plot comes in. It became, well, a wetty in 2009 after a very narrow referendum. Funnily enough, the people who voted no said it would cause drunk driving accidents, which is weird when dry counties have a higher percentage because people just drive, then drink, then drive back, and then die. And anyways, okay, enough about that. Let's get to the meat and potatoes of today's video. The meat and potatoes being the murder of 4 people. The Champion family moved to the area in the 1950s. Lindsay Champion, at the time, being about knee-high to a grasshopper. And they were a farming family, with young Lindsay becoming the old one, and having a family of his selves. He worked at the Farmers Credit Union offices in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, for about 38 years. And during that time he married Joy, the joy of his life, his high school sweetheart, later becoming a high school teacher. Lindsay and Joy would try for many years to have kids together, but just wasn't meant to be. So, in 1978, they adopted baby Ryan when he was 3 months old. 5 years later, in 1983, they never stopped giving it a go. Who knows? They managed to have a child together. Joy would give birth to baby Emily. And so the family were a happy, quiet, church-going, God-fearing, nice country gang. Lindsay became director at the credit union. Joy named Educator of the Year in 2008. Ryan and Emily had a sibling rivalry from youth to the end. And eventually, Lindsay and Joy would retire. Ryan joined the military, where he remained for almost a decade before returning to Kentucky and moving to Oak Grove, about 30 minutes from downtown Cadiz nuts. Emily, she went her own way, that way being to college, Auburn University, and she became a vet. Horses being like her speciality. She worked in Louisiana at a racetrack there. The Champions were like big into horses. It's not going to come up again. And so all of that kind of sorta takes us to October 2014, when there was big trouble in Cadiz. Didn't start out that way though. That autumnal October, as the leaves were falling, and red, orange and brown were the colours you'd see, Emily was back home in tiny Cadiz. She was back home spending a couple of days with her family before she was due to start a new job in November. Emily, she took part in a marathon. The next day the parents went to Sunday service. Emily was still resting her dogs after the run, so stayed home that Sunday. That Sunday being the 26th of October. A few days before Halloween, though there would certainly be some horrors that day. The elder champions then returned home to start cooking up some grub right with Emily. And then, it was shortly after 11 in the AM that neighbours of the champions heard gunshots. A lot of them. One neighbour in particular was the sister of Lindsay Champion, Lisa Champion. She heard those shots too, thinking it odd at that time of day. A few moments later, she heard banging. Someone banging on her front door, screaming her name. It was Ryan Champion. In his hand was a shooter, around his wrists, torn up duct tape. And he was just roaring at her to call 911.
What's your emergency? My nephew Ryan Champion just came to my door and his wrists have been tied with duct tape, and I haven't been able to find out what's wrong. He doesn't appear to be injured, but I don't know what's happened. Okay, ma'am, where would I be sending the ambulance to? Right across the road. I'm going to go over there with him, okay?
Ryan told his Aunt Lisa that they had just been sitting down, getting ready for Sunday dinner, when some guy just kicked in the door. Some guy who took a fancy to Emily, this guy. He just started blasting. And so Lisa, not having any of this, she ventured across the road to the Champion house and saw what she saw.
Oh, please, my brother has been shot, and his wife, Joy. My nephew is here, and my niece has been shot.
She was greeted by a bullet hole in the front door. On the property were the bodies of Lindsay, Joy, and Emily. All dead. Shot dead. A mass shooting. The only surviving champion was Ryan. Lindsay was found outside the house, just beside on the concrete. Joy, too, she'd been shot in the face and lay there, slumped over. Emily was found inside, duct taped up. Mouth, hands, feet. She'd been shot twice in the head. So not off to a great start here. And things then got very strange when they found a fourth body in the house. Not related to any of the champions. The police had no idea who he was. Ryan said what happened was this. He had been chilling at the house on Old Dover Road, watching the telly with his sister, spending some time with her as she would only be back for a few days. So they were just hanging there on the couch, chilling out, when they heard somebody come in the door. And they assumed it was their parents coming back from, that church service. It wasn't. It was a guy named Vito Reservato, a fella Ryan knew. Ryan said Vito walked in with a gun and duct tape. Now Ryan barely knew him, he'd only met him a few days prior. But apparently this guy, this Vito character, right, he was absolutely infatuated with young Emily. Not in a healthy way, clearly. Vito then taped them both up, and just when he was finished, the elder champions arrived back home. Upon hearing their car, Vito rushed outside and they just heard gunshots. Then Vito came back in, went past Ryan saying, "Excuse me," walked over to Emily and put two in her head. Then he turned the gun on Ryan. A Ryan who said, "Not today." See, during this time, Ryan had managed to finagle his way out of the duct tape, and so when Vito turned the gun on him, Ryan, after a bit of a scuffle and action movie scene, Ryan managed to grab the gun off Vito. Bang, blew his head off. He avenged his fallen family. And then that Queen song played. Pretty dramatic, right? Well, these things happen.
The crime scene is in Cadiz, Kentucky. A suspect was also found dead. Police haven't released the name of that person yet or exactly what they think happened.
Police arrived to find a horrific discovery at this home off of Old Dover Road in Cadiz, Kentucky. They say earlier today they arrived to find 4 people shot dead, including a family of 3 and 1 suspect. Tonight, the investigation continues into how all of this happened.
We found 4 people dead inside and outside of a residence here.
Police say 3 of them were Lindsay, Joy, and Emily Champion, a husband, wife, and daughter visiting home, shot dead this morning. Another person inside, police say, was the suspect, someone the family may have just met last week.
We're not 100% sure of the relationship between all the folks that were involved. It's possible that the suspect did know them, but it was just briefly.
As afternoon turned to night, word came that there may have been another family member at home during the attack, someone who survived.
This is This is a pretty gruesome crime for something like this to happen, to have multiple murders at one location.
So that was Ryan's story, and he was sticking to it. But what was it about? Why would Vito do this? Who even was Vito Reservato?
This is gonna be fun. Alright, hold up. You better slap him some kind of decent though. Go ahead.
Smack him!
Vito Reservato was 22 years old. He was born in Las Vegas, Nevada, but had been living in Hopkinsville for some time where he graduated high school. And he was now living with his 1-year-old son. He was married, though separated. His wife lived in Bardstown. And he didn't have any criminal history is more to the point. And as a hard-working fella, him doing what Ryan said he didn't make sense. But these things rarely do. The community rallied around Ryan. The champions were well known in the community: Joy, teacher; Lindsay, credit union director; and as horsey people, folk knew Emily. Ryan, they didn't know so much. After all, he had been in the military for quite a long time. The investigators certainly wanted to get to know him, though, and I wanted to get his story, just tell it a few times, just so we have it down. After all, why did Vito kill Emily in such a brutal execution? Why did he execute her? That's what I'm trying to say. And then, how would he even know Emily? She had only been in town for a few days. In fact, how did Vito know any of the champions? Well, apparently Ryan, who worked, odd jobs in construction around the place. You're building a shed, you need landscaping done, whatever. That's what Ryan would do, and he had recently hired Vito. About 3 days prior to the shooting, Ryan had driven Vito to the champion abode on Old Dover Road. They had to pick up some tools from the house, and that is when Vito encountered Emily. Vito started saying some inappropriate things to the lady, so inappropriate that Ryan cut ties with Vito that same day and told him to jog on. Obviously, he came back with a vengeance. But as the investigation continued into young Vito, Ryan's story began to leak like a sieve.
Okay.
Is that cat okay the way it is?
Yeah, that's fine. I can see that.
I guess, just so I have it spelled correctly, I obviously already have your name, but R-Y-A-N, no surprises on that?
That's correct.
Okay, and the last name?
Champion.
Okay. I guess the first question in all this, this has been a horrific 24 hours. How are you personally holding up? You seem remarkably composed.
Well, I'm just, I've got one of those mentalities to just soldier through something. Really, that's what's been carrying me through, is that things need to be done. Especially, some people aren't doing so well. And to be honest, I really don't know yet, really, how to feel about any of it. I was kind of at a crossroads of being glad to get out of there, but at the same time, it was horrible. And it never really set in, never really set in until I'd say it took really a good hour to sink in. He was a new person to all of us. His relationship to us was only a couple of days old, but I don't think I can go into any more detail than that. But I was constantly trying to zone in on if I could do something. I was always looking for an opportunity, but it was so confusing. I'd love to tell you more about the scenario, but it was a very confusing scene, and it was my impression through a lot of it that something wasn't right. I could have done something, but it was always a risk. It was always a huge risk. It wasn't a simple solution. I read in one news report that my hands were bound, so I guess I can say that. My parents were unbelievably good people. Unbelievably good people.
The police then went to speak with Vito's roommates, and they learned a little bit more about him. One thing was that he had in fact been let go from his previous job 3 weeks earlier, and he was struggling to pay the bills for him and his young son.
This guy, he was awkward at best when he talked to people. Awkward at best. And he didn't make a very good presentation of himself. He kind of came off as he kind of had a vibe that would, make old people uneasy a little bit. He's not, he just kind of had that way.
He never gave off any weird vibes, was a totally normal, happy dude. His roommates also told the police that the day of the shooting, when he had left their shared apartment that morning, they said he was acting off, just weird. He told them he'd be back in a couple of hours, he left his phone there. He never returned. Then, after Vito's friends saw this interview,
his relationship to us was only a couple of days old, but I don't think I can go into any more detail than that.
They told the police, no, Ryan is lying. They knew each other. This wasn't like they had only known each other for a couple of days, working together and it didn't pan out. Not like that at all. Ryan is full of shit. They were friends. Ryan's name came up in conversation all the time. They knew each other for years. Ryan is talking out of his hole. And they also told the police that, maybe a week before, Vito told his friends someone had told him they would pay him a certain amount of money, an extreme amount of money, to kill somebody. Ryan reenacted what he said happened for the police. And they said it was more or less hilarious. I mean, it would be if, The microscope was now on Ryan. Holes in his story. Holes like how many bullets were fired. And you said you were taped first, when in fact you can clearly see on the tape, the one that was around Ryan, that he was taped last. He was arrested for the 4 murders 2 days before his family's funeral.
Champion told WKDZ WHVO radio from the Christian County Jail that he knows what took place at his parents' home in Cadiz, Kentucky, when his mother, father, and sister were found shot to death, along with the body of Vito Reservato. Champion would not discuss details of that day, but did say he feels deep regret missing his family's funeral.
I don't think that there really are words for it. I'm not ready at this time to deal with the immense amount of suffering and loss that this experience has forced on me. I can say that the officer's decision to arrest me on Friday caused me to miss out on a time with my family that I really needed to have. I'll never get that back. I'll never have that time, ever.
At this stage, though, they had no idea why he did what he did, or why Vito was even there. It wasn't until someone who lived in Oak Grove, Ryan's where he lived, called the police saying that they had seen Ryan, Vito, and some woman eating together at a Waffle House. Another lie quashed. Ryan and Vito knew each other longer than he had said. And this woman, who's she? Well, if she was in movies, you would call her a character actor, and her name was Anne Plotkin. She was someone who had defended Ryan when the eyebrow raises began, and not only that, Vito had been romantically involved with her daughter.
But now, Kentucky State Police say Champion is responsible for the death of his father, Lindsey Champion, mother, Joy Champion, sister, Emily Champion, and Reservato. That's something his friend, Anne Plotkin, refuses to believe.
I don't understand it. I really don't, because I know Ryan and know. There is no way. I'm going to be there for Ryan no matter what.
Because Ryan had been romantically involved with her. Phone records between Anne and Ryan showed a plot, essentially. Anne had been the middlewoman between Ryan and Vito. So Ryan and Vito would never message each other directly. They would always message Anne, who would message the other guy. Anne helped plan the murders. Ryan used her the entire time, though she may have loved him. And Ryan planned to have Vito be the fall guy for the murder Ryan, ex-military, was to commit. Vito told his roommates that somebody had asked him if he would be interested in doing a little killing. Now Vito, he had never shot a gun before in his life. Ryan, military quite a bit. So whether Vito was actually gonna go through with this Seems like he was well aware of the plot, but if he was going to do it, remains doubtful, I think. Vito might only have been aware of the plot to some extent. He might have been lured to the house where Ryan killed him, Emily, and his parents. If he was lured there because he was broke, well, whether or not, he never got the chance anyway. Ryan killed them all and then wrapped himself up, and he was the hero.
When that happened, it was so quick. It wasn't much of a decision.
Ryan hated his family. It would be financial too, to some extent, but not the whole extent. He was jealous of his sister's success. He believed they favored her, and then he wanted to inherit everything they had. Now, they didn't have a whole lot, but enough to be comfortable for some time.
The Kentucky man police say killed his entire family and another man before claiming he was the only person to escape a kidnapping appeared in court today.
Good afternoon. The court calls the case of Commonwealth versus Ryan Champion.
Ryan Champion came into court Monday shackled after investigators charged him with capital murder and kidnapping.
Let me ask you, are you able to hire your own attorney?
Possibly.
Ryan pled not guilty. 2 months before the trial began, a trial where Ryan would face the death penalty, he decided to plead guilty to the murders of his parents, his sister, and Vito. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
And everyone in the courtroom, we want to acknowledge and to say that we wish condolences and are very sorry for the deaths of Joy and Lindsay and Emily Champion. We also acknowledge the death of Vito Reservato. We also wish and hope that Ryan will continue to grow in learning empathy and compassion, will continue to grow as a whole human being, and that eventually, today, perhaps not, a year, perhaps not, but sometime in the future, he can be recognized not simply for the horrible and tragic acts that led us to the courtroom today, but he will be recognized for more than the worst things that he has ever done.
Please shut evil away for many lifetimes. Evil took our 3 precious lives from us, resulting in the quality of our lives being severely diminished.
In May 2017, Anne Plotkin pled guilty herself. Pled guilty to 3 counts of complicity to murder, and she was sentenced to 22 years in prison. She was up for parole on the 7th of February 2019, petitioning for early medical release. She had a terminal illness. Don't exactly know what. This was denied, and Anne passed away the very next day. And so ends the story of the Champion murders. A story which still has a lot of gaps in it, to some extent. I mean, Ryan, harboring hatred, resentment his entire life, you know, towards a sister and parents who always loved him. Everybody said they always loved both their children equally. One was more successful, sure, but they never cared. God love the fact, though, that he was gonna try and get a guy to kill his family, and he did it himself, and killed that guy. Quite a plan. Funny he wasn't a fucking idiot, it might have worked out. And all that, anger, money, it's why we think he did it. He's never said, even though he pled guilty, he never admitted doing what he did or showed any remorse. So we'll never know why or how everything went down exactly. He just said he was guilty, not that he did it. And that's how he will go out. What a chap, you know what I mean? By name and nature. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to do so. Here, go on. I'll see you as always real soon in the next Owl video. Till then, please take care of yourselves. All the best. Mike out.